Tonight we begin with a development that federal investigators had feared, tracked, and quietly prepared for. A multi-agency enforcement action that unfolded not over years, but in hours. Hours that shut down an alleged $8 million trafficking network. Hours that led to sealed indictments being unsealed. Hours that triggered international shockwaves from Minneapolis to East Africa. What this network's organizers did cross a line that U.S. authorities had hoped would never be tested. And when that line broke, the FBI and IC did not hesitate. They responded with speed, coordination, and overwhelming force. For more than 18 months now, there have been signals, not official press conferences, not public court filings, just whispers, financial anomalies, and quiet informant reports that something deeply unusual was forming beneath the surface. Federal investigators described the suspected network as complex, yes, but also remarkably disciplined in how it moved money, people, and medical access. Its behavior followed a certain pattern, a rhythm, almost a routine. But what set off alarm bells inside federal task forces in Minnesota late last year was that the routine suddenly stopped. Analysts who monitor transnational trafficking indicators know the signs. The money flows paused. The encrypted communications went dark. The shell nonprofits froze activity. The medical referrals abruptly ended. And whenever a network like this goes quiet, it usually means something is about to get very loud. Early this week, federal authorities detected what court documents describe as coordinated logistical movement, including medical equipment transfers, and large financial withdrawals that had not been observed in over 6 months. These are the kinds of operational signals that criminal networks only activate when they are signaling something specific, an exit, an escalation, or a final transaction. Investigators didn't know which category this fell into or whether it involved all three at once. But what they did know was that the network had changed posture. And when an organized trafficking operation shifts posture without explanation, even slightly, federal authorities pay very close attention. The response issued by federal authorities was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Source after source briefed on closed-door meetings describe a move as decisive, time-sensitive, and perhaps most importantly, preventive, designed to stop harm before it occurred. But prevention only works if the target hesitates. This network did not. And that is why today's response became one of the largest coordinated raids we've seen in this category in recent years. Here's what we know. Within hours of authorization, federal agents executed multiple warrants. These were not standard compliance checks. These were high-risk, court-approved operations, using tools and authorities reserved for human trafficking and international organized crime investigations. Tonight, law enforcement sources confirm that federal agencies launched simultaneous enforcement actions on multiple targets across Minneapolis, including medical facilities, residential properties, and financial intermediaries. Several of those entities had recently been restructured or renamed, a move analysts believe was intended to obscure financial trails. Authorities moved before suspects could relocate assets or individuals. They hit financial processors. They hit logistics coordinators. They hit medical intermediaries believed to be preparing for additional procedures. In other words, investigators targeted the operational core, the components that would have made the alleged trafficking system functional. That is what made the operation so urgent, because according to investigators, the suspected activity was not theoretical. It was actionable. And federal agencies responded with force, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't sweep blindly. They didn't act prematurely. They struck where evidence converged. And here is where the story becomes even more disturbing. Sources now believe the network was designed to test enforcement boundaries, to see how much could operate in plain sight before authorities intervened. The organizers wanted to see whether oversight systems were fragmented, whether jurisdictional gaps could be exploited. But the opposite happened. Federal agencies did not hesitate. They acted with a level of precision and coordination that immediately drew attention, even from overseas observers. You don't get that kind of attention easily, but today, investigators did. Analysts familiar with trafficking models described this alleged structure as hybridized, combining humanitarian language with criminal logistics. But today's response proved something critical. Federal authorities remain both capable and alert. The actions taken were not only forceful, they were surgically precise, so targeted that evidence chains remained intact. That matters because it shows institutional awareness. It shows this was not a reaction. It was a response. Reports continued coming in throughout the day. The scale of the operation became clearer. Federal agents executed warrants, seizing records and devices. Financial investigators froze accounts linked to suspected proceeds. Immigration enforcement identified international movement patterns, allegedly connected to the operation. This was not a single arrest. This was not a local investigation. This was a network disruption. This was transnational enforcement. And transnational enforcement is exactly the type of pressure these networks struggle to withstand. For every layer of insulation they build, authorities now appear prepared to dismantle it. Historically, networks like this rely on three assumptions: that oversight systems won't connect the dots, that humanitarian language will discourage scrutiny, that jurisdictional complexity will slow enforcement. But tonight, the opposite is happening. Those dots are being connected, that language is being examined, and that complexity is being neutralized. What makes this moment so volatile and so consequential is that developments come amid political pressure abroad. According to court-linked intelligence summaries, a foreign regional leader has been identified in filings as having alleged indirect ties to individuals now under investigation. Supporters demand clarification. Critics demand accountability. International partners demand transparency. And legal teams demand evidence. Leadership under that kind of pressure rarely moves from confidence. They move from vulnerability. Federal authorities release a statement, now widely distributed, signaling that they are not willing to allow human exploitation under any cover. Officials said plainly that the alleged activity was inconsistent with U.S. law and international human rights norms. That is enforcement language for, this will not be tolerated. You do not hear that tone unless something serious is at stake. Meanwhile, federal leadership addressed the public tonight in a measured, direct address. They said, "We will follow the evidence wherever it leads." They said, "No individual is above the law." And they said, "Our responsibility is to protect the vulnerable." These are not rhetorical statements. They are legal signals. What makes the situation even more concerning is that this activity was not isolated. Alongside the primary investigation, additional facilitators were identified. Related financial conduits were flagged. Parallel inquiries were open abroad. All of this unfolded within the same time frame. When multiple threads converge at once, it suggests something larger was in motion. Analysts now see several possibilities. One is that the network was preparing to expand operations. Another is that it was attempting to liquidate and disappear. The most concerning possibility is that it believed it could operate with impunity. Today, that assumption collapsed. Authorities did not delay. They did not deflect. They acted. What we are witnessing now is a test of institutional resolve. Criminal networks want to see hesitation. Law enforcement wants to show readiness. Governments want to prevent harm. And courts want evidence. Tonight, the evidence is moving. Sources say monitoring is ongoing. More interviews are scheduled. More digital evidence is being processed. And additional charges remain possible. The response today, swift, coordinated, and deliberate, sent a message to those involved. And to those watching, as this investigation continues. More facts will emerge. But what is already clear is that the response was timely. It protected lives. It preserved evidence. And it reinforced accountability. What happens next depends on what those implicated choose to do. Tonight, for the first time in months, the network is quiet. Too quiet. And when silence follows exposure, It usually means reassessment, because tonight, one lesson was reinforced. Exploitation leaves trails. Trails lead to accountability. And accountability does not stop at borders. This story is far from over, and we will be watching every step as it unfolds.